Okay, welcome back. We're going to start talking about the flexible learning environment. Okay, so the flexible learning environment actually has a variety of definitions that go with it and a variety of meanings, because the very first and most basic thing that we think about flipped is what we're doing is we're taking what traditionally happened in a classroom. Students come in, students sit down, teacher teaches from the front, gives knowledge to the students. From time to time, students might ask questions, but it's primarily a one-way street. What we want to do is take what was in this box and determine what belongs in the box and what doesn't belong in the box. Because there are a number of things that we have traditionally done inside the box of the classroom. Well, they don't have to be done in the box of the classroom. So flipped learning takes certain elements and it takes them out of the box and puts them somewhere else. What we want to talk about are two spaces. We want to talk about the individual space. That's the student space where they are there by themselves as an individual. And the reason we use individual space as opposed to home space is because the individual space can actually be a lot more broad than a student at home. On top of that, we have a number of students with challenges that home is a very flexible concept. So let's keep it in terms of the individual space, and then let's take a look at the group space. Now, sometimes the group space is what we would consider the classroom, and that's true. A lot of times the classroom is the group space, but with digital technology, it doesn't have to be at school. It could be over a digital medium. It could be a chat. It could be a blog. It could be a project or a Google Doc that they're working on simultaneously. So students can be working in groups well outside the classroom for years and years. We always know that some students work outside the classroom, some productively, some less than productively, in terms of homework completion or just homework copying. But that's not what we're going for here. We want to make any group space, whether it's digital, whether it's in person, or whether it's within the bell-to-bell structure of our classroom, we want to make that group space as effective as possible. So, individual space over here, what the student does on their own, group space, what the student does with a group or other peers. Maybe the teacher's here, maybe the teacher isn't. But in those two spaces, we want to talk about making a flexible learning environment. So let's go back and let's put our classroom. All right, now in our classroom, we have lecture. And in fact, right now, you're watching a video of me talking, and I hope to convey some information to you. And that can be done one-on-one in a group setting, but that would require me to know who you are, me to come to your place where you are physically, come to you at a time that's convenient to you, and come to you in a framework at a cost structure that we can work together on. That's a lot for a conference. Sometimes it's just as much for a student, because whether it's a student that has different challenges in life, whether it's a student that has activities, whether it's a student that simply has illness or whatever their reasoning is, they may have a challenge getting into this box. And so if the only time they can get information from you as a teacher is when you and they can coincide and get together face to face, that limits the time that can be spent learning. And that's where the flipped model comes into play. Just like we're doing here, let's take some of that instruction and let's move it. Let's go put it over here in the individual space. And in this individual space, the student can get on their Chromebook, their computer, their iPad, a digital device of any sort, their smartphone. These are things that the student can access this type of instruction that tends to be more one way, as we have it here, in their individual space. They do not have to physically be in the same space any longer, given the abilities of technology. So let's take that and move it to the individual space. Now, there's another piece of the puzzle that's almost traditionally been done in the individual space, and that's that idea of practice. Now, we need to be careful. I personally am a math teacher, and I know I am guilty of assigning 30 or 35 problems a night to students for practice. That's not practice, that's torture. So I still believe that students need to work in that individual or independent space on math so that they can be independent of me and perform independently at a mastery level. But I don't know that 35 problems is the way to go. So one of my key things is homework can still be done at home and it's still called a flip. Now, but let me tell you what I'm talking about. I tend to include my instruction in what's called digital instruction blocks, and we'll come back to those in a little bit. But it's basically the little piece of instruction that I move over here. I also include a digital instruction block of a few problems or a few pieces of practice, and those also go with the student to the individual space. Now let's clarify. I have 30, 1, 2, 3, so 30, 3 times 10, or I have 3. Which one makes more sense to move to the individual space, especially as students are only just learning about the materials? In my mind, it's that 3, so I move those to the individual space. Here's the other advantage. Remember, the individual space is meant for preparation. They're receiving some knowledge, okay? They're receiving some information. Usually, it's base level. If you think about Bloom's triangle, we're only putting those basic levels of Bloom, those vocabulary, those reigniting previous experiences, those types of basic levels of Bloom's. We want to put that in the home space because they're easy for students to wrap their heads and their hands around in that individual space. They can also take those 3 problems, or 4, or whatever it happens to be, and they can work on it before they come to the group space and bring that information with them to the group space. And now every student already has an idea of what's going on. Every student already should have 3 correct answers, or at least, if not correct answers, they have 3 items on which they have 3 good questions. This is where Crystal Kirch comes in and her whisk method, and making sure they bring those questions with them. What questions has the material brought? But that's, again, look her up, it's great. But they come to the group space prepared. So the flexible environment first takes those things out of the classroom, puts what they can in the individual space. Now, what happens when they come to the group space? Well, let's take a look at our classroom again. What in our classroom belongs in a group space? Well, in this case, interaction. So if a student is already prepared or has questions about what happened in the individual space, then they can bring it to the group space. Now, if they bring their questions, they bring their interactions to the group space, now class time has space for different activities that can be done as a group. One of the biggest challenges about doing anything new in a classroom is that that classroom seems to be filled all the way to the top or even overflowing with too much stuff. But we've taken some of that stuff and moved it to the individual space, allowing us not just more space in the classroom that we have, but we can also add in things into the classroom space that best benefit the group. One of the best ways to use that flexible environment is to create some of these other flip pillars of intentional content. And one of those things that I always include is presentation. Because if a student could present it to me, I can clearly see their level of mastery. But those are things I didn't have time for in that traditional classroom box. So that's why we move some things to the individual space, some things to the group space, and what allows us to move more group pieces into that classroom space. That's just the start of using a flexible environment. We'll come back and go into the flexible environment a little bit more deeply later.